Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. For the final show of 2017, we welcome back a returning guest and transform him into a New Year's tradition. We are speaking about and with the one and only Conner Habib. Hey, Rumi, how you been?
How you doing?
How are things in my LA house?
Well, since I did a lot of work removing the evil influence you had on the guest bedroom here, things have been all right.
Generally things have improved since July, is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. It took a long time. I always felt like Lady Macbeth scrubbing the floors. It just wouldn't come out. But now you're gone, totally.
Wonderful.
But here you are again.
Yeah. Just keep coming back. Well, we spoke... and we actually talk quite often, but in terms of podcasting, we spoke at the sort of like the beginning of a year. I found that, and so did the listeners, quite useful. You have a particular skill, Mr. Habib, in getting people's heads in the right game. So given that we are now looking at 2018, I thought it is high time to have the listeners hear your dulcet tones once more. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited about this, like, as a little tradition. Like, yeah, what will Conner and Gordon say that people feel gung-ho about for, like, you know, a month or two and then forget and freak out?
And also, what will they say that will be widely misinterpreted? I mentioned on an earlier show, because we were kind of joking in the lead up to the LA event, that we could have called it Hills to Die On, because there's some things that there are some discussions, some real talk, fam, I think, that needs to that is ongoing, admittedly. And in fact, I want to kind of put a shout out to your show in that sense. I think you've kind of found a mission there, which is trying to get some challenging real talk in amongst the sort of snowstorm of hot takes. So how have you found it? How have you found, being part of the podcasting clan?
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's a lot of work, everybody. If you want to start a podcast in, like, a web series, which is, I have dual format for Against Everyone with Conner Habib. It's a lot of work, but it's really gratifying work. I started the show for a lot of reasons, but one of them was I always felt, with a very few exceptions, your show being one of the exceptions, whenever I'm on podcasts and we're about to go deeper to the places where the conversation really needs to go, it just stops and we, like, switch topics. And that always really bothered me, because I thought, no, this is, like, the real shit that people need to hear and need to grapple with. And what I've found is, I've had a bunch of socialists on the show so far. And what I found is, like, for instance, people of that political stripe are really desperate to have deeper conversations about their ideals that actually reveal new things to their audience, and also allow them to sort of think into those things that they've been wanting to talk about. So if spiritual aspects come up, if aspects about our inner life comes up and how we're doing political resistance, it's really exciting for them, and also really exciting for me. And I feel like that's been sort of my idea all along, which is I have kicked myself out of so many different worlds. I was the humanities student who studied the sciences, who was also spiritual, who then became a porn performer, who's now talking about radical philosophy, that I became a bridge between these worlds. So Brooklyn hipster humanists will listen to me talk about the occult because they know I'm not a religious fundamentalist, because I've done porn for 10 years, So it's like I've been finding that being that intersection of all these different roads allows people to talk with me about things that they want to talk about, but maybe don't get a chance to, and therefore through that talking get to think about it more. And I, of course, get to think about it more. And it's been awesome.
Yeah, it's well, that was actually one of our hills to die on, if you recall, which is and you are positioned in a good spot, and I'm getting to a point here. And one of the hills to die on was that the worldview or the foundational premises underlying socialism or anywhere kind of like left of center are stupid. They're stupid in a materialist sense. So there's I think the discussion, and you've kind of landed on it a few times in the show, is that's the level you fix rather than reject, because you go, okay, well, at the moment we have the dysfunction of a more defensible political position, which I think is further to the left, but it's sitting on top of a stupid metaphysics, right?
Totally.
And that's where I think it's been really interesting watching the show, and Chapo doesn't talk too much about magic or any of that stuff, right? But you've been able to push it in that direction, and it's surprising how amenable people at that end of the spectrum are to those kind of discussions. And I think it's good work, because as we kind of discussed in LA, if you don't do it, you leave magic to right of the center rather than left of the center, and it's too important to leave it to them.
Or even just as bad are the people who are practicing occultism or magic of some sort and just don't they're just not educating themselves on the world in any other way, so it's like you end up getting it's like Magic Con, like you get it's like self-contained magic geeks. And I think that that's a real problem as well. And I think, I think people are really like, you're talking about Chapo. So I had Felix Biederman, one of the founders of Chapo Trap House, on my show. And which is, if you don't know and you're listening to this, it's like it is hugely popular leftist podcast that makes like $90,000 a month on Patreon, which is just like unprecedented, And Felix was like, "Oh, the occult is cool, and I think like porn stuff is cool, And I think, or I had Mark Bray, who wrote this book called the Antifa handbook, Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, and in that book he describes the history of the Antifa movement. So he's like, it's not just like kids who are disgruntled throwing shit at Starbucks windows and no platforming Milo. He talked a lot, or a bit at least, about utopian ideals on the show. I think that people are really excited about their imaginations, but the left doesn't really give us enough of a place to put any of it, or put any of that creative energy, because it's so much about on the ground resistance. But as I've always said, and I think, and I know you agree with, the on the ground resistance becomes worthless if it's not paired with a real dream. And part of that is because it becomes then materialist, repetitive, patterned action that only leads to marginal change. It has to be tethered to the devil or the sun or the lovers. It has to have a bigger, major version of itself.
It does, and that is kind of why the foundational premises is stupid. It's very good, and indeed this is literally the whole point of Practical Enchantment, is to remake the world, right? That's what it's for. It's to rearrange the probability so that the world matches more what it is you would like it to be than it currently does. So it rather begs the question, which goes unbegged very often, which is, what is matter? What is
what is the world?
Yeah, what are we doing here? And unfortunately, because, well, it's not even unfortunate, it is just an artifact of history that the foundational kind of leftist ideas emerged in an industrialist, mechanist universe of matter and materialism. So that's the bit that's gone uninterrogated for, the interrogation of that needs to be updated. And it's also a weak spot. That's the other, there's a kind of strategic component to it if you would like these sort of ideas, a left-inflected utopian discussion to happen, that's a weak spot. And if you don't have the response to it, if you haven't thought with those ideas, what is matter? What are we doing here? What does it mean to rearrange the universe so that it best matches our dreams? You're lost. Like, you can be taken down by Milo, honestly.
Well, it's like, I think it's like, you've said, I've said, it's just the oppressors are using magic. So it's like, and not all of them realize they're using it, but plenty of them do. And so if you're just going to leave it, like, as you just said, like, they'll be the ones that take it up. And, not only that, I think, it just, we become unwilling, sort of like unwitting mechanical beings, in a sort of resistance machine. If we don't have the dream, and I think we don't even know what the human being is. And I think if we would just do a little work there, as activists or as people who have some political ideals in the world, if we just step back and say, okay, so what is the human being? Since this is what's acting right now, I'm a human being, I'm thinking, I'm moving, I'm trying to make the world a better place. If we would just ask that question, what is the human being? That actually can lead us down all sorts of pathways of possibility. And that, that's the medieval prescription. That is a magical, contemplative act. It sounds like nothing, but the fact that it's so hidden, I mean, it's just like the occult in plain view. It's a question we don't ask. It can really lead us somewhere and start to reroute our actions properly.
I want to take it back, because that was obviously very insightful, but I want to take it back to what you were saying earlier, that I think at a fundamental level, it's not just the left that is failing to have its roots grow deeper into these sort of foundational reality premises. We kind of live in the magical craze at the moment, which again we were asked about in LA, is a sort of inevitable manifestation of a very ersatz culture. And we have an ersatz resistance, which is that, as you say, you get caught in the mechanism, or even just the hashtag of resisting. Like, I'll just retumble something with a resist hashtag on it, and it's it makes me feel very Gnostic, because that's a trap, right? The roots aren't getting into the foundational premises when we're stuck at this ersatz culture. So has that been your experience of sort of being out there and being loud and also having discussions with intelligent people? Would you describe it similarly?
Well, tell me a little bit more. Would I describe it as like we're just...
So I watch, I don't know if you watch Broad City, for instance, but I love it. But it has that, the depiction of witchcraft as solely being feminism without the magic. And that kind of... That's an ersatz version of something that is immensely powerful. And if we stay at the ersatz level, which everything else in culture is, you can find apps there were apps that came out immediately after the election for where you could find a protest. So it was becoming essentially jogging or Grindr, right? So where is the nearest? And you think this is not plugging into anything authentic. And I mean, is that what you're seeing, and what do we do individually about that?
Yeah, I mean, I really wish that there was an awareness of all the magical and occult power that was enacting itself through us in our actions right now. I feel it's not too much to hope for, but it's too much to think that that's going to be an easy sort of awakening. But sort of part of the level you're talking about is just sort of that Grant Morrison thing where he's like, okay, so I used to try to get into all the magical stuff, and then I realized everything was magical, and I didn't necessarily have to change as much as I thought I had to change to reach it. So it's that sort of second knowing, like, holy shit, just look around. Everything is witchy. But if you just sort of put a gloss over it and say it's witchy. That's also not really the realization of it. In fact, is a distraction. So I think, I've been talking a lot about lately with myself about, really I want sexual liberation for everyone, and I want occult liberation for everyone. And the way I understand occult liberation, because it's not a term people use very often, is or ever, as far as I know, is that I want it to be. It's like sexual liberation. And so when I think about people's resistances to sex, sure, they're having sexual thoughts, they're having sex, they're jerking off, they're whatever, they're looking at ads and having sexual responses to them, they're having their Freudian slips when they talk. But sexual liberation requires an awareness of those states and how your state shifts constantly in your consciousness with relation to desire. They're really actually the same thing, occult liberation, sexual liberation, but they're sort of different images of it. And so the occult liberation is sort of the same thing. It's I'm paying attention to these different states. It's as simple as paying attention to your dreams, as simple as paying attention to what happens when you use a dollar bill. It's as simple, or a credit card or a Bitcoin. It's as simple as understanding the weird, act of writing symbols on a piece of paper and holding them up in a group of other people and shouting the words that are on the paper. So then once you do that, then you can start taking intentional actions to actually do that kind of stuff. And sexually, you become a better lover and a better person to talk to, about these things in the world. And also you usually get laid more. And so occult wise, you get to start harnessing that power. But I think it's just as difficult of a process. So what we're seeing now is essentially more orgies, but less awareness that an orgy is happening. It's like more of the activity is happening, but I don't know how many people are just sort of, having having awareness of the act that they're engaged in.
And when we sort of planned this show about a week or so ago, the idea was to kind of pull on those threads for most of the hour and have a very upbeat show about kind of switching up your head game for 2018, because this is something you and I talk about a lot, and generally make it, as we head into 2018, this is the last show of the year, really upbeat. However, in the week since we made these plans, the sort of neoliberal empire apologists have found a yet more preposterous statement to make that I really want to kind of highlight, because you just, as I was saying before we hit the record button, we had a version of UFO disclosure this week, and it still wasn't the stupidest thing I saw in the news. So, Conner, is Jill Stein a Russian agent?
We're all Russian agents, Gordon.
Evidently.
Don't you know? We're all Putin's puppets. I mean, I've been on RT, so I'm really fucked.
You're also friends with Abby, and she's also best friends with, Putin, obviously.
And Abby's brother, and I've eaten at a Russian bakery, so really it just goes on and on. I think it just, that's this obvious thing that's going on. I mean, we don't have to talk about Jill Stein specifically so much as how desperate people are for some understanding of how power works. So desperate that they're just continuously looking in the wrong places. It's just, and again, it's this thing that's just plainly in front of you. Okay, the nations that we are clearly intertwined with that motivate our political, our politics in the world. There's Saudi Arabia or Israel. There are other nations as well that we can just look at quite easily without going into all this Russia nonsense, and putting so much emphasis on it. And so then, it's just very obviously being used to dismiss any right that another voice might have in this conversation.
Any alternative to the empire. That's why. And is this people losing their mind? I mean, can we spin this as being good news, or at least partially, because it's that centrist empire apology position is now so absurd? Is it because they know that the jig is up? Because I don't know what's left after the idea that Jill Stein is a Russian agent, and I'll get to actually what I do know is left. But is there a way we can see the Russian glass half full of vodka here?
Well, I mean, let's say somehow they frame up Jill Stein and come up with all this information about why she's a Russian agent, or okay, fine, like let's say she is a Russian agent or whatever. Like, let's say the stupidest thing in the world also happens to be like true somehow. I mean, what's the purpose of this revelation, and what does it even serve? I mean, it's still just the weakest, most ridiculous thing to even point to or examine or consider or think about. And so I think people are sensing that a little bit, and it's like this sort of the hardcore centrists. I don't know. I always have hope for people's potential, and I think that maybe some of those people will shift out of this. But I think a lot of people who aren't the hardcore centrists are like, that's a little weird because. Let
me tell you what it looks like outside the U.S. You can't. It's like the sort of stuff a toddler tells you about his or her morning. I can't. And this, funnily enough, is what I think the glass half empty is. We've moved through the kind of McCarthyism has returned to the US, and it's manifested in two key ways. And we'll talk about the first one, which is we've gone from, because there was no evidence of it because it didn't happen. One, you can't hack an election, like that. Those two words don't go together. You're getting like a newspeak thing. Hacking is a slang version of a technological process, and an election is this organic thing. Like, you can't hack a Democratic Party. It's just mental. Like, it's fiction, even if it did happen, but it didn't, right? But what we're now getting to, because there is no evidence, is cooties. Is Russian cooties.
Right,
and that's scary, because the other side, not that there's any difference, left, right, war party stuff, you can kind of have a Russian war without the war, because now that any association with anything Russian, an Orthodox church, a Fabergé egg, whatever you want, is now cooties, and you can't do it, and that can kind of bring someone down. The next step in that is the communication and digital controls that get imposed on a Western population, which we're kind of seeing. This sort of, there were 3 retweets of a pro-Russian tweet, so that's why Hillary lost. And that's really dangerous.
The regulation on RT is definitely
correct.
An event,
that is the goal. There has nothing to do with Russia. The goal there is the reorganization and clamping down on communication and expression. It is McCarthyism, and it's the piece that you need to continue propping up that sort of fulfillment layer of the neoliberal empire. And you have people, and you say, I'm not sure if there's much to be done with centrists other than navigate around them. You do kind of hope that from that really poor soil, some worthwhile people can grow and migrate. But that's the dangerous part for it. People think the end game of a Russia fantasy is very bad for Western communication, and you have people clapping along for it.
I think that there is something about, and it may be a miscalculation of Jill, that Jill Stein will not just stride in there and say everything that she's always said, and recenter those kinds of concerns on the world stage, which is what Bernie Sanders was also doing. So whatever you think of Bernie, because he certainly is a problematic figure in a lot of ways, he did shift the attention. as Trump did to some extent before the election as well. But he did shift the attention to different issues. And I think that, as far as it being partially full, if not half full, I think that her presence in this, right away, she was just like, sure, I'll do it. Let's go.
Yeah. And also I will publish, I'll make public all the documents that I'm giving to you as well. Like that, I call your bluff. She's very good like that. That's why she was our candidate, right?
Yeah. And the Green Party is connected to an international movement. It's not like Democrats and Republicans, which just sort of conservatives and liberals, whatever that means in this country. Maybe there's a spectrum that connects itself to other countries. I think even though the Green Party is different in other countries and takes different forms, there's a sort of a deeper solidarity there. And so I think also that changes the scheme of things a little bit as well.
It does. Well, that's it's just inevitable that it would be the. They may come for Bernie as well, but it's inevitable that it would be Jill because, as you say, Bernie was problematic. He was quite good domestically, right? But Jill was the only candidate who had what I consider the only non-psychopathic position when it comes to particularly the Middle East, but just war in general. Right. And she's the one that's being hauled up in front of a kangaroo court to look for imaginary stuff.
And I think it's about the Green Party, really. Like they're attacking the Green Party, and the Green Party is the only, really the only party that really listens to what the people who are in the Green Party want, and is willing to significantly revise their campaign and their stances based on that. And it's like I was fine with Jill Stein. She has anti-sex work policies, which really bothered me. But when I tweeted out about that, the Green Party literally contacted me and said, we want to rebuild our position on sex workers. Can we talk to you and other sex workers? I was like, hell yes, that's awesome. Any party that's willing to do that. There's a real investment in change there if they do that,
So Kamala, who takes photos with Bibi, no. is not change?
Ugh. Yeah, Kamala Harris, God bless you if you don't live in the U.S. and you don't have to know who this wretched person is someone like there are a bunch of political figures over here right now that are just really more of the same, but are really pushing hard on, against Republicans and appearing to be saying all the right things. But then you just sort of scratch the surface. And, Kamala Harris has been at war with sex workers' rights for years and also supports prison labor, forced prison labor. And there's also a really crazy story about her being connected to a secret police force in California, which was in mainstream media for 2 minutes and then just sort of disappeared. But if you just look up Kamala Harris secret police force, you'll find it still in the mainstream media archives. It's not. I'm not getting too skeptical on this, or higher side chats or whatever. It's just all right there. I think that there are real problems with this human being, and you just cannot escape her presence as this new hero because people are. I don't know what people are thinking. I don't know.
This is that you have an ersatz savior, but it is a rebranding, and this is why they come for the Green Party. It is a rebranding of the centrist imperial policy. This one will work, but there is absolutely no underlying changes, and that is why the US has ended up in the situation it has been in. And when they start pushing the Kamala thing, you kind of have to put the hit out on the Greens, because the same thing will just happen, and potentially more. Potentially there'll be more. It's like, wow, because they haven't learned their lesson. They literally have, and they will never. The Democrats will never learn that lesson. It just kind of leaves me speechless. And that's sort of, it began, I couldn't believe when obviously being in Australia, I wake up and the US day is kind of about half over. And so I wake up and get in the first sort of 20 minutes, boom, 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 all the absurd things that have happened, just straight up. I don't get a full news cycle worth of, and now it's like Jill Stein, Russian agent. And you think, I honestly don't know where it goes next, but it comes back to what we do about it. And that for whatever reason, the conditions of reality make a traditional understanding of collective work more difficult. And I mean, for whatever reasons, in a kind of cosmopolitical, semi-Gnostic sense. For this point in the timeline is not associated with integrity in political groups, so that you can't. It's not an internal thing where you can go to a meeting and pick the right candidate and plead your case and run an election and win and fix things. Like it's just broken from beginning to end. So why? And I think it's a manifestation of what you were saying. In the kind of socialisty world, there is interest in having the metaphysical discussions. I think this is part of it. I think we need to have the words to think about all the knee-jerk 20th century stuff you had previously relied upon, whether or not it worked or not. Arguable, provably doesn't work anymore. It's not finding the right candidate in the Democratic Party and going for it. It will literally never happen. And I don't know what that is. I mean, is it the kind of classic mystic response that you begin with yourself and kind of change and improve the universe from one person out? What are these kind of things? What does it look like to find other people who share your vision of reshaping the world, and what do we do? Big question. You have one sentence.
Here we go. I mean, I think the work always has to be dual. I mean, I think you just have to be doing the inner work and the outer work at the same time. I mean, the way I describe it very simply to people who don't have a spiritual bearing is like, do the on the ground stuff, but in the meantime, think about what you want, right? And I think that this can lead us into sort of the discussion of how to encounter and greet and become in the new year is, like, what do you actually want? It's just a question that is not being asked, and I've been asking this question for a long time. I've certainly been asking it all year, which is like, what if you win? What if we push through this sort of political moment? What's going to happen? How can we? And I think we talked about this on the last show, like way back in January, and we talked about it in July as well when you were here. It's just you're not going to create a world out of resisting the world that's here right now. The resistance has to happen. You have to do it, but just to sort of mediate forces and make space and create new tensions for things to grow out of, you have to do that resistance work. But are you envisioning anything at all? And I really feel like people aren't, and that's disheartening. But all you have to do is ask, and it's either a shock to the person's system, like, oh, what do I want? Oh, or they've actually had a sort of idea in their head all along, or they've wanted permission. I find a lot of socialists, and if I'm like, hey, I know you think Marx is cool and he's great, fine, and he has a fine enough vision, but have you checked out this Fourier guy, this like utopianist who thinks that like planets are bisexual and should make love with one another, and that the ocean should taste like lemonade, and that there should be a sexual minimum where everybody gets a certain amount of sex in their life, and like, have you checked him out? Because he's got all these cool things to say that sound crazy, but wouldn't that be more fun to read and think about? And they're always like, oh, that's so cool. I mean, I think people are really they find themselves drawn to imaginative responses. I think there's this extra problem of getting them to commit to the imaginative response because the imagination has been so degraded and really just sort of beaten into submission by all factions, including the left. So, but I do find that people are either shocked by being asked what they want, or they're really desperate to engage with it, or they have something and they're so excited when you pose the challenge to them. So I think it's just starting there. I just think it's like, it's so simple, and it is, it's a Crowleyan question, which is probably, his most profound contribution, which is an obvious contribution, which is like, okay, what do thou wilt? Like, what do you actually want? So now do it.
Well, this is, we'll use this as an example because this is literally what utopias are for, but I'm going to get you to describe what utopias are for in a second. I feel like and you're definitely the right person to talk to about this. I feel like the right subject, which will kind of demonstrate your position there, is the current, and this is the other part of the McCarthyism that I was mentioning, is the current sex panic gripping the US with its sort of guilt by accusation, White Houseian prudishness. And here's the question then. How do we have two thoughts, which is, on the one hand, it is actually a remarkable cultural thing happening, which is, it turns out, sexual abuse and sexual misconduct is truly systemic, and it does feel like a high watermark in that, as a normalized behavior has been reached and that tide of grossness is receding. Great, all that is good. Nevertheless, the receding tide can be confused, if you're not awake enough, with this sort of sex panic. How do we get that to work? Like, this strikes me as quite utopian, which is, I want a world that it's sexually free and sexually intense, and has sexual depth for everyone who is interested in sex. And I also don't want people to be assaulted at work. I feel like I can have both of these ideas, but I don't think we're very good at talking about them.
Well, right. You and I actually talked about this. Was it on Grammarica or whatever? Where
and you saw it coming? Yeah, that was our Grammarica episode, because yes, this is what happens when Washington uses control files to get things across. This is the risk. So you carry on, because I think it's hugely important.
Yeah, well, so they were asking us about Pizzagate, and I just said, like, look, you got to understand that if it comes out that some politician is having sex with a bunch of kids and, like, turning them into soup or whatever, you got to understand, like, that's not going to be good for us. Like, it's not going to be some great revelation where everybody goes to jail and we have this radical restructure. What's going to happen is that the people in institutions who are already in power will seize on that to restrict our sexual freedom and our occult freedom, because that's what they do every time, something happens, and they'll figure out as best they can a way to get them off scot-free as well. So, there was all this sort of like hope, like, if we just crack the Pizzagate code, like, we can get these motherfuckers behind bars. Sure, maybe some of those people will be there, but also this will be taken out on us in a certain way. Now,
I just want to interrupt, because I've come around to, I had an additional thought based on what you said in that show, which is that doesn't even have to be a law enacted, right? So here's something that's been occurring to me, is the control file stuff has been going, and it turns out a whole bunch of different politicians are having extramarital affairs, and you think, who cares? Who's straight up? I don't know. Maybe my little brother, although I haven't asked him, but I don't know. I think any married couples that don't have some sort of arrangement, like anyone there is no, because it's fake, but there's like no pure version of monogamy in my life. And why would that be different? Like, that's the weird bit. So people lose their jobs for having an extramarital affair. Have you asked the wife or the husband? Who cares? And that's a cultural hit. It sort of renormalizes this mid-20th century pearl clutching stupidity, and you don't even need a law.
Right. You don't need a law. You just need a culture that's ready to accept false equivalencies, and we are totally always ready for that, because we don't do any education sexually. So I have a friend who was just telling me, there's a movie out here, I don't know if it's there yet, but it's called 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, and it's by the Irish playwright. It's written by the Irish playwright Martin McDonagh, and he's a great playwright. He's super smart. The movie is excellent. But there's a bunch of racial slurs in it, because it's a bunch of characters who would use racial slurs. And my friend, who is actually a really intelligent person, who's like, well, I had to walk out when they said this, because I couldn't take it anymore. And I, wanted to stand in solidarity with the people of color who were in the audience or whatever. And I just was like, are you out of your mind? Like, this is a movie, and he went through all his sort of social justice, like, kind of explanations for why that was so. And it really hit me because he's a really smart guy to have made such what I consider to be a foolish move. He's very smart in all these other areas in his life. And I finally just realized this is really a result of us having no arts or humanities like education at all. And I don't mean education like go to school to some Ivy League college and learn about art, but like infusing our culture. We don't have any ideas of how to interpret art, and then we end up approaching it with a justice lens. And it's the same thing with sex. We have no idea how to interpret it, so we end up like trying to grapple with it with a justice lens. And these things, sexuality and art, are beyond justice. We have to realize that these things are larger than the thing that we're trying to understand it with. It's just we cannot approach it with this lens. And that doesn't mean that there aren't components that we can't try to interpret and work with through our sense of justice and politics. But because we're viewing it that way, because we don't have the right ideas, we don't have the right education, we don't have the right mindset to go in and examine these, we're willing to accept things like in this sexual context, for instance, of, blurring the lines, and they are blurred, whether or not we blurring the lines between I'm a man who cheated on my wife many times, and I'm a man who sexually assaulted someone. Like, this film director, Morgan Spurlock, came out and said, he came out and said, I'm part of the problem. I had sex with this woman and she thought she was assaulted. I have cheated on every woman I've been with. And I'm like, whoa. Like, these do not belong in the same sentence together. Like, this is not the same thing, but people were just sort of eating it up in whatever way they ate it up. Like, or someone being super gross on a date with somebody, really grossly persistent and disgusting. You can see this. There's a specific example I'm thinking of, but I don't feel like going through names. And it came up, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, that's so horrible. That's assault. That's awful." It's like, no, that's not assault either. That's someone being gross and disgusting, and we should call that out. Here's the problem. The problem is that it's not that we shouldn't say that cheating on someone and lying to them isn't wrong, or that being gross on a date isn't wrong, or whatever. It's that people in our culture right now feel that they have to claim utter violation to deserve help, and that is really revealing of how horrible things are for so many people right now. You should be able to say, I was not totally violated in this situation. Nevertheless, I have feelings of violation. I have feelings of like intensity, and I don't feel good about it. Can you please deliver some compassion, understanding, and help to me? But people don't feel that that's available to them. So instead, they turn to a state as a mediator, or they turn to a culture that is acting quite a bit like a carceral state as a mediator for these discussions. So because we don't have compassion for each other, because nobody's willing to listen to someone that doesn't say, I was killed by this event, I was damaged beyond all repair by this event, because we don't have enough, we've not generated those relationships between each other, we end up turning to authorities of one sort or another, and then we end up enforcing the authority structure, which further degrades our ability to have compassion and to create freedom for one another. And that's just to tie it all up. It's like, if we start becoming people who understand art, if we start becoming people who understand sexuality, not only does it make the offenses less likely to happen, it makes it easier for us to mediate the offenses, less likely to turn to authorities and hierarchies and these disgusting spiritual structures and beings to mediate these conflicts for us.
Well, that's extremely well said, which is unsurprising, I suppose. But for me, I kind of have I'm going to use that ersatz word again, because I think it's the word of the show for me. When you look at something, you go, is this ersatz or not? And that binary and you see it, I've seen it over the last 2 years on Twitter, for instance. There is an ersatz progressivism where the progressive position has always been kind of like, I'm nice but I'm weak, and now it's I can't do anything and everything literally kills me, and it's a binary on and off, and the discussions we're having about, as you said, like if you had, and everyone has, and this is obviously the usual caveats, like I'm certainly not apologizing if you've been in a situation where you were sexually forced upon and all of that. But is this an ersatz resistance? Is this an ersatz revolution, an ersatz magical renaissance? Because it is that kind of tweet length, uninterrogated, knee-jerk response that makes things worse rather than better. And that's the sort of three manifestations that we're kind of talking about: the centrist politics that doesn't change anything about empire, the sex stuff, and then, as you just mentioned, because these are all intertwined, which is the culture piece, which is how do we get deeper roots into reality, into authenticity? How do we have these experiences? How do we validate the meaning in things that happen to us, profound stuff like sex and art and so on? And over the last few years, I've been saying with some urgency that everyone needs to become their own Rivendell as we kind of go through this. So in that sense, I mean, you need to be the person that knows Plato, and you need to be the person that, and I don't just mean high art stuff. I mean, you need to be the person, you need to be the storehouse for knowing how to interrogate meaning and depth and so on, because people will need that. They need, as the sort of the this kind of ersatz apocalypse washes over things. And I feel like that's you need to be the place that can hold that until the conditions change. And is there anything else how do we do that? I don't know if you agree with that statement. How would you redescribe it, and how do we do that?
Yeah. Okay. So let me add one more comment to your ersatzness, and I think ersatz apocalypse is a really good name for like an album or something. So someone picked that up. But I think
Hills to Die On from ersatz apocalypse.
Yes, exactly. So I think as my friend Heather Berg is she's a labor studies professor, and just so smart. And she said the other day, just casually in conversation, she just throws shit like this out. She's like, well, even the most vulnerable of bodies has more of an ability to say no to sex than to work, right? And she's just very like comfortable saying this. And so what she's saying, and what I'll bring it up, is like, okay, we have these misdirections happening. So when you say ersatz, I'm like, okay, in a world that is hyper non-consensualized, in this place where we don't get to choose whether or not we want to work, and not only that, work 60 or 70 hours a week or die. Work 60 or 70 hours a week, don't get health insurance, watch your kids die, blah, 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 blah. All that kind of stuff. Watch as all kinds of world events unfold around you that you have no say in, no consent in. By the way, use this thing as your mode of exchange and currency. Stop at these stop signs, be shot by the police if you don't listen. And so it's like this world where consent is totally being removed. And so then we start doing these hyperstructures of consent in sexual spaces and in artistic spaces, which are magical free spaces for us. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have consent in those spaces. We should, but why is it sort of filtering in there, and can we actually instead do this reverse work? So it's reverse ritual. So look at what sex can give me. We'll look at what art can give me in all its different forms, or conversation. I'm calling them free spaces. Now, how do I send that power back out into the world, rather than trying to sort of drag all the hyperstructures of the state and corporations and contracts and exchange and currency into these spaces? How do I actually invert that and sort of blast out the freedom from those spaces into these much more rigid? So I think there's that is part of the first step. That's reverse ritual, I think, is a good way to describe it. I'm borrowing that phrase from Rudolf Steiner, but I think it's a really good way to think about it.
Yeah, that last bit especially was kind of useful to dwell on, because in these situations, don't pull on the control mechanisms. Don't bring them into your Rivendell as a knee-jerk first step to solving a condition. Like it's an upwelling. it's not. Don't bring the Nazgul in. I could probably go all night with. I won't, because we possibly diverge on opinions of Tolkien. Another show.
Well, can I talk about your like naming thing for your farm project? Is that all right? May I mention that?
I have no idea what naming thing. I have so many names running
so
for it. Possibly you can.
You said you were going to name everything on your farm a different
name. Right.
Like
yes, this is. Oh, absolutely. I am banning scientific names. And you understand, because I mean, Lynn Margulies was a second mother for you, and so you understand the imperial component to, and it's literally an imperial worldview. The creation of scientific names is associated with the mapping and drawing up and appropriation of the entire planet by European powers, and it encodes a very specific machine universe into it. Everything that's going to be on my farm, the hundreds and hundreds of species, it's a folklore farm. It will have its common name. It will have its folkloric name. I will know the story of each plant person in that space. And that is that's literally Rivendell, I suppose, but that's actually my that is an upwelling of culture. Because this will all be sort of Northwest European stuff by and large. There'll obviously be Australian or Tasmanian endemics as well, and I'm doing that very deliberately. That's a kind of weirdly that comes back to what we're talking about. How do you rearrange material? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, I was going to bring that up as part of a tactic. So what I was thinking was, if you have this place that everything is named differently. And in fact, I would also recommend to you, if you may take a suggestion from me, that you give everything its own name from you. And I suppose that's part of you knowing every plant being's story, while you're there. But that you grant it its own name in relation to you. And then, in addition to that, there's a project that I've been wanting to work on for a really long time, which is encouraging everybody to create their own individualized anatomy book. So instead of accepting the organs that are in your body that you can never see, which is the scientific description, oh, you have a gallbladder, you have a liver, you blah, 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 instead do a phenomenological anatomy book. I have a headache organ. I have an organ that allows me to not be able to breathe. In other words, start if you want with illness, because it's easier to notice your illnesses, but then start with all the other physical sensations that you have. You can't see your own face, right? So that would not be part of your anatomy book. It just doesn't make sense for you to talk about something that you can't really experience through your eyes. So you can feel your face. In other words, start describing the entirety of your physical being based on your phenomenological encounter, your actual experiential perception on it. So then, if everybody who came to your farm had their own anatomies based on their own experiences, and everything that was there was named differently according to it being in this place, you'd actually be in a different dimension. You'd start living in a completely different world, and the power of that, I think, is really profound. It's this thing I've been suggesting for years, but I don't exactly know how to do it. But this is one component, which is like the cartoon, where Bugs Bunny's being chased, and he is chased down an alley, and he's standing in front of a brick wall, and he pulls out a piece of chalk and draws a door on the wall and just opens the door and walks through. First of all, where is he walking through to? How does that door work? How does the piece of chalk? It's create a doorway to a new possibility and then just go through it, rather than trying to engage with the circumstances and fight off the people that are chasing you and all that. Draw a door. And I think this sort of so the tactic really, these are examples of the tactic, but the foundational strategy or tactic is engage with what you're actually experiencing in the world. It's a very simple tactic, but it's not apparent to people at first that they can do that and how much power it has. So when you and I did the event in July, and I had to sort of describe my version of what the occult was, I said it's radical phenomenology. All you have to really do is look at your experience, see how fucking weird your experience is, and then you can start redescribing the world based on those experiences. Whether it's has to do with, what you read and interpreting the fact that you're looking at symbols on a page. I've gone through these examples before. I don't want to go through them all again, but basically look at your experience and start bringing that to the world more and demanding that like you speak in those terms and that people meet you there in your terms, or they can present their own, but they have to be their real terms. And so then you really start breaking the world a little bit. And it sounds like, oh, that's just word games. It's just whatever. But it surely is not, because you leave like the webbing and the netting and the things that are ensnaring you. And then that allows new possibility, new space, new action, all that kind of stuff. And so I think it's that. It's really is this work of creating different dimensions. And I think you and I should talk. You said you want to talk about, so I hope we do get a chance to talk about like also just infusing that with what you want as well. Infusing that with desire.
Yeah. And I know you use the word engage with deliberately there, because for me that is and it's a head game, that's the difference between the ersatz progressivism where bad things will happen to you and you dwell on them. Like that sort of improper use of intersectionality that you see expressed on Twitter, essentially. It's a fake thing, but we're using it as a talking piece. That's not engaging with, that's letting it happen to you. Bad things will still happen. You engage with the world. You don't let it happen to you and then tweet about how you need help. That is, I mean, you do, but like that is actually one step in engaging. You don't just get caught in this web. And why the whole idea of this show, other than the fact that, as you say, we're building traditions and you're the New Year tradition, we were having a chat about things that are going on in your life, and I want to tee it up by observing something when the premium members did the sigil course at the beginning of the year, and then I went back and for people who've since joined, went through the homework. One of the activation methods we used for them was William Bengtson's energy healing method, and it involves picking images of things you want in your life and cycling them, basically. And one of the things he observed, and I kind of said has happened to me at the beginning of the year, was in the process of doing this image cycling, you will have to keep updating it because you'll end up manifesting them. So you sort of pick 20 things that you absolutely want in your life, and there's no budgetary constraints or anything, and you end up having to update it because they manifest. And as I was going through the homework for other premium members a couple of weeks ago, it occurred to me I have to update 5 of mine because at the beginning of the year I didn't have a farm, I didn't have any of these things. And I thought about them and now they're real. And this is what I mean about plugging, and you do as well, of course, plugging that best politics, if you want, for the 21st century into the fundamental reality of the universe that we are in, which is that this shit works. Like when you say it's not just fucking word games, it isn't. I thought afar. Obviously, there was a bunch of other magic going along with it, but I want you to kind of tell where I kind of interrupted you. You were in the park for non-sexy reasons the other day, and you're kind of very good at this. So talk us through, like, literally just manifestation. Just talk us through how that works.
So first of all, whatever you need to do to get over your fear and insecurity and resistance to sort of new agey manifestation stuff, fucking get over it. If that means holding a wooden stick and wearing a robe and, like standing with your feet in an inch of water and painting some symbol on your forehead, go ahead and do it. Okay. But understand that you've got to get over that. You just got to get over it. And maybe it means actually holding an object that represents your doubt. Like, do it that way. If you can't get rid of your doubt, like, just hold a stone that's like, this is material. This is the material world. This is all my doubt. This is my worldview. That's materialism. So that's going to be that. Okay. I mean, this is rather simplistic, but I think that might work for some people. Now, do what every new agey successful person tells you to do, which is imagine what you want and figure out a way to bring that into being. So here's a very simple way. Imagine a day that you want, from waking up to going to bed, and imagine it in the present tense. So I wake up, like imagine the room that you want, okay, I wake up, it's a quiet room, I'm under the covers, I'm very warm, the sun is coming in my window, I stand up and, my cat is standing near the bed, whatever the hell, like just start doing that. Build the day, build it in present tense, and feel the feelings. Write it down, then read it out loud on a recording on your phone and listen to it every day. There's so many reasons to do this. But like just the basic face value one is that it works, and then that day will appear if you enthusiastically feel your way into it. Here's the thing. You want to get all your political conscience like straight and worked out too, because look, if you want a calm day in I don't know, if you want to live in Kuwait and you want a calm day, like the world is going to have to shift, for you to have that calm day, or you're going to be exploiting people. So you want to start doing some personality refinement along the way. It's the Rudolf Steiner quote, and it's just an occult maxim, which is for every step of occult power you gain, take 3 steps to refining your personality. Like start doing that inner work to becoming a better, more grateful, more loving, more compassionate person, so that the world you want isn't built on the suffering of other people, so that day can be, whatever. So I don't think you have to be like, I'm in a world, where there is no sweatshops or anything. Like if you start refining your personality and you imagine that peaceful day that you want with all the things that you want in it, and you start working on that with magic or however you want to work on it, then naturally, like that world is going to be sort of drawn, into being with less suffering, So I think that's the foundation. You basically create a ball of intensity in your hand of whatever you want. I'm imagining a sort of like white sun in my hand, and you throw it into the future at a certain date, and it becomes your anchor, and everything starts to fall in place around that. And we know that this is how things work. We just know that this is how things work. It's tested, it's true, and it works. And don't feel badly if you don't get everything you want in the way that you envision having it. And also, don't feel like it's necessarily going to happen in the exact way that you imagine. And also, if it doesn't happen, don't think that it's your fault. Just know that maybe you need to sort of do a little bit more work around it and like keep trying. So I realize people might be listening to this and being like, well, fuck, that's not what, Evola said, or like whatever the fuck, what everybody wants a much more complicated version of these things.
Yeah. And the other part of it is, it was quite good that you say, manifesting or envisioning a world without sweatshops. Here's the thing. Whilst there is a kind of freneticism to progressive responses in the world, right? And that's part of the trick. So you could kind of cynically say, oh, well, just sit down and wish. You go and accuse it of being denialism. It's the opposite of denialism, because this stuff works. So it's denialism to be cynical about just thinking the fucking future. That's the denialism, because this works. And one of the things that I remember from my media days in London is there was one agency in particular that kind of the usual, speaking of ersatz, the usual sort of ersatz materialist versions of magic that you sometimes get with corporate consultants in an agency space. But they decided that they would force the people at creative director level essentially out into the park for a minimum number of hours a day or a week. No work, don't take the phone, and just think. And this dramatically improved the creativity and the concepts that they came back with their clients. And there is when people are busy, and I appreciate that, multiple jobs, family, all the rest of it, it feels like a luxury to say, do you know what, family and everyone in this house, I'll be back in 45 minutes. I'm going to walk to the park and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to imagine, and I'm actually just going to, as you say, look at 2018 and say, these are the things I want, just and picture it. And these are all of them. I want this from a health perspective. I want this for my kids at school. I want this and this and this. And it's somewhere in between a plan and a manifestation, but no one does it because that just seems the opposite
right.
of getting you what you want. It's like, oh, well, that hour I could have been spent doing something. I could have been doing towards it, but literally no one does it. And this will have a measurable impact on your life. In a universe without magic, this would have a measurable impact on your life, because people kind of careen into the future with barely half-formed ideas of what they vaguely want. Mostly they're hoping certain things don't happen rather than things they want. And even if magic didn't work, this process, and this is kind of one of the things I wonder, which you did, because you have a very exciting year coming up, but one of the things you did was kind of like just go somewhere and think about what you want for next year. And in a park, I mean, I've got the river beside me here. I can do that there. No phones, no nothing. Just go and spend 45 minutes thinking about what you want, and it will have a transformative effect on a purely materialist basis on 2018. And that's before you, as you say, it's been verified. You look at the intentionality experiments of Bill Tiller, Elizabeth Targ, even Lynn McTaggart, all of these people. We have 120 years of, lab verified data that shows that how you think about the world affects the fucking world. And it just, there's an urgency behind what appears such a simple or simplistic process. And I think opening into 2018 is absolutely the right time to kind of get everyone out there. I know it's winter for most of you. Be out somewhere away from your normal life for 45 minutes and no one else, no distractions, and just manifest 2018.
Right. And I think, so I love all of that. And I think, look, if you really want, like, you only have to do the 45-minute thing once, like, meaning even if you did nothing else, that would make a difference. But also you can just sit down and like I said, just do this day, like envision your ideal day, write it down, feel it. Don't write anything negative in it. It's not. It's just all positive. And then read it into your phone, record it, and then just listen to that every day, once or twice a day. You can do it while you're falling asleep. You can do it wherever. And if you wanted, which I think you don't because you listen to this podcast, if you want to believe in a world without magic, that would reroute you through subliminal programming and all that kind of stuff, and it would be great. The thing that people who are into magic don't like about this is the simplicity of it, and it's too new agey and it's too dumb and all that kind of stuff.
It's also, there's a misogyny to it, having done this for years.
Right. You're right.
The new age is sort of 70% female.
Yeah.
And occultism is that gender split is reversed. And I've observed a few times, having been to Mind Body Spirit events and occult events, that the cars in the car park of the Mind Body Spirit events are a lot nicer than the cars in the car park of an occult event. So I can make an occult case for getting over your new age cynicism, which is they have some tools that work, and it's a dereliction of your own duty to not explore them. But I just want to throw a lamp on the fact that some of the new age resistance is misogyny.
It's just, you're right. It's just misogyny, because does feel like, I mean, experiencing a loving, embracing energy of the universe instead of thinking you have to send a lightning bolt out of your dick into a deer antler. It's like, it doesn't feel, it feels a little bit more feminine, and generative. And so I think, for that reason as well, it's misogyny. But I think, look, all the other stuff that you want to get involved in, the spiritual hierarchies, the planets, all this, numerology, details about things, nature spirits, whatever, like, it's all there too. Like, none of that threatens
it's not zero sum. Absolutely.
Exactly.
This doesn't, you'll still have your super awesome wizard street cred if you go into the park and you don't, and I get this, funnily enough, a lot with premium members, that they're suspicious when I say it's that simple. Well, how do I open this ceremony? And I'm like, it's irrelevant. You don't have to.
And I think maybe more now than ever too, this is true, right? Like we really are being asked to become universes, we really are being asked to become something more than we were before. And so this generative power, which is so multi-available to us at the stupidest level, at the checkout counter at the grocery store, in some magazine about The Secret or whatever. I mean, it really is like people are being asked, now to become to engage in the world in this way. And we'll still have things that we need to contend with. In fact, this will present us with new things that we need to contend with. They won't be the same old problems. There'll be new ones that we have no idea what to do with, but they will start to show up for us. And so don't worry, things will still be interesting. They're not going to be monotonous just because everybody's getting what they want at this level. We're just going to now be in a new level. And I think also it's like, look, yeah, karma comes into play, and other spiritual beings come into play, and all of that, and it's all different for all of us, and so we're all going to have to contend with that in different ways. Because the first thing that people ask when you say something like this, if they're socially conscious, is like, okay, so what? So like, Palestinians who have just had their, olive farm like bulldozed over by the Israeli military and like, some of their family shot, what they're just not like secreting it enough. And it's like, okay, first of all, you don't need to know that. Okay. I don't always have an answer for that realm. I'm saying it works for me and I think it'll work for you. And the fact that you're refusing to let it work for you by paying attention to someone else who you think it wouldn't work for means you're not assuming the responsibility that you might have. And could you not help those people better if you had all the things you wanted arranged in your life and you were able to engage with your life? So actually it's a dodge of responsibility. Yeah, it's not taking more responsibility.
Back to that denialism. Like,
yes.
You can't be cynical about this because the universe isn't a universally beneficial place to be, and it is an exciting area to explore theologically, but it's sort of irrelevant to the practice of it. And I just kind of the other part of cynicism that I like to remove here, and again it comes back to my memories because they're top of mind of the homework associated with the Sigil course, is this is so much harder than like this is, if you're thinking, oh, this is just easy, you go, I guarantee you it isn't, because I've read through hundreds of people's sigil statements, and this stuff is free. That was the kind of point that I was making in the course. This there isn't a zero-sum component to it. So if you like, why would you attenuate your ambitions or your manifestations when they're free and they work? And it's difficult. People don't know how to do this. And I know that because I've had to go back to them and say, you need to think bigger than this. You need to, if it takes the same amount of, I hate using these words, but we'll go with it later, the same amount of energy from the universe to get you a semi-detached house at the edge of town and right. A steamship, like it's the same. And that takes a lot of practice, frankly. And this is why I kind of want people to go, this works. If you're listening to this, you live in a magical universe. And it just, my Christmas gift to you is, and ours, I suppose, is, we can co-sign the card. I mean, I bought it, but whatever, is give yourself the 45 minutes somewhere alone to just think of your best 2018, and I will tell you it will be your best year.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate that, as if you have headphones in your ears or whatever, and you feel Gordon's voice and my voice in resonating as vibration that's turning into meaning in your being, it is saying you're going to have an amazing year, and you're allowed to be loved and to love people and to have what you want. And there are a lot of directions you can go with this. And if you want to refine your personality first, read the 7-Day Mental Diet by Emmett Fox and just do it. He's a new thought person. And as Gordon says, it's a lot of work. So you'll be gratified at how much work you have to do instead of just making a vision board and cutting shit out and putting it on a poster board and hanging up in your room. Although you can do that too if you want with Pinterest. But do the 7-Day Mental Diet. You will have to continually pay attention to your thought. And no matter what happens after that, you're going to be a better person for it, because you're going to be someone who's paying much more attention to the inner workings of your being. But part of me feels like I should have just ended on the very nice thing about like, whatever. But I really want people to have workable tools here. So the 7-day mental diet, or just find whatever like new agey thing works for you. Do, whatever book works for you. There's this book called You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. This is very like, she's very like, she has a sort of cynicism herself about it. She's just like, yeah, I know this is annoying. It's bullshit. Like whatever. Like go read that. It changed my life. It'll change your life. Do 45 minutes. Like Gordon said, do the thing where I said present tense day that you want and record it and listen to it. There are a million different ways to do it. But the fact of the matter is like, unless you actually take that step and do it, you're going to be receiving information, narratives, and patterns that you're going to be spitting out again. And they could be things that even seem good to you. They social justice narratives that seem amazing to you. They could be gloom and doom. I can't wait till we get hit by an asteroid, like bullshit that people are doing. They're going to be anxiety. They're going to be jobs that you don't like, whatever, But like, this is up to you. And this is really, I think, Gordon, what you talk about constantly on this show, and what I think a lot of us who are in a magical world are trying to do, which is just say like, this is your right. Like, this is who you are. It is your birthright. Like, be a fucking galaxy and create life, So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a sort of splendid way to end 2017 with that lovely message, Mr. Habib. So for people who would like more lovely messages heading into 2018, lay it on us.
Yeah, so you can just follow me on Twitter if you dare use Twitter. Conner Habib at Conner Habib. My web series is on iTunes, it's on SoundCloud, it's on Stitcher, and it's also on YouTube. So, main thing is go to my Patreon. So patreon.com/Conner Habib. It has links to everything there, whether you're contributing or not. It has links to everything, and I love if you contribute. I think it's awesome when you contribute and get involved in the stuff I'm doing. You get all kinds of extra stuff, free episodes, extra episodes, Skype chats with me, all that kind of stuff. But listen, 2018 is going to be fucking awesome. Yeah.
Conner Habib, ladies and gentlemen, laying out both your best and only options, frankly, for 2018. Not really much more to add to that discussion, other than to earnestly entreat you to give yourself some time right now when the world is quiet, to sit and think and open up your imaginal capacities. They're always at work anyway, so if you don't grab the wheel yourself, then you are handing over driving to the 2018 news cycle, and it is drunk out of its fucking skull already. We have some great guests lined up for next year, so please do subscribe to the show and also tell your friends about it. Human to human is the only way we move the discourse forward. Other than that, I earnestly pray that all your own prayers are heard and answered, and that you will look back on 2018 in 12 months' time as a procession of personal miracles. Until next year.